So when Dr. Meg Lowman, #CanopyMeg, and Dr. Alamayu Wasi, foremost expert on church forests, asks you to come to Ethiopia and study and film, you go.
Meg and Dr. Alamayu have been working to promote conservation of the church forest for over a decade.
The short story about this is that Ethiopia has had forests that are dwindling for years and years. The original forest with high diversity is just not there anymore.
In northern Ethiopia, 95% of the forests are gone, and that 5%, most of that is here in the church forests. As you look out of a plane and you see it from overhead, there are tiny little circular mounds of trees with a circular church in the middle. The problem is they are shrinking.
Dr. Alamayu was the one who discovered that the church forest would disappear in a matter of just a few years. So he stopped what he was doing, he teamed up with Meg and held the first ever priest workshop, a conference to share information and spark ideas about how to save the last forest left in northern Ethiopia before they disappear forever.
Meg's getting in. We're getting ready to go here.
Here we go.
All right.
Forward.
See you at the conference.
The priests come from far distances, remote areas, and it's not very easy to get here to the city. The willingness to make the journey, to take the time, shows how committed they are. So let's peek in and see what it's like in one of these historic meetings.
ሳይንቲስት ናቸው እንግዲህ እሳቸው የሚያቀርቡትን እኔ አስተረጉማለሁ. I am briefly introducing you. Of course most of them know you. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I am very honored to be here today and talk to you about your amazing church forests. And as a scientist, I protect biodiversity. As the church, you protect all of God's creatures, so our message is the same. I'm also grateful to Dr. Alamayu. We have been a partnership for 10 years now because I am the global voice, knowing your forests are so unique to the whole world, and he is the local voice. So together we need those two elements to make sure that we can help ensure that these forests are here for the children and grandchildren of Ethiopia. Right now, the church forests in northern Ethiopia have less than 5% remaining from your original amount. So when we look with these images from the airplane, we can see that the forest is very endangered, and the last pieces of forest where all of God's creatures reside are in your supervision, your stewardship as the church forest. It's quite a shocking photo, actually. That gives you the responsibility not only of the human spirit, but all of the future of Ethiopia's biodiversity. So 10 years ago, Alamayu and I started working on surveying what lives in your forest. We surveyed the trees and the insect pollinators and the ants and the mammals and the birds. And some of you came to us and said, but wait, these lists of species don't really help us save the forest. They only are a piece of paper. So we realized we needed to do something besides just the science. We needed to do something that would be more actively helping to save these forests. Some of you also suggested maybe we try to form a partnership more than science, but science and religion together. So thank you very much to your Archbishop that we formed a pledge that we would work together to make sure we can provide any kind of resource helpful to saving these forests around your church. And so today we're here to just give you a summary of the value of your forests. We all understand how much temptation there is for people to clear firewood, for people maybe to plow close to the edges or let the cattle graze inside. And over time, a lot of your forests have been shrinking dangerously close to disappearing. Here's an example, of course, from one of the forests, Debrecina, where we have the tree that used to be in the forest now surrounded by crops. And that tree is so important for medicinal purposes. 5-6 years ago, the first workshop was in Debre Tabor, trying to think together how can we work as a team to make sure that you do not lose these precious forests. And together, all of you, not me, came up with the solution. This was a beautiful surprise for me. In the second year I returned to Ethiopia, that the Zara church had a beautiful wall and the Debrecina church had a wall in construction. So some of you realized that your stones could make this beautiful boundary to help keep the forest safe from the cattle grazing and keep the forest from shrinking. My role as a scientist is simply to perhaps work from afar using a little technology to share with you and doing a little fundraising to try to ensure that every church with a wall might have some contribution or donation to make sure people know how important it is. I am also a mother, and I think it's very important to think about the future of the church forest, the future of Ethiopia's biodiversity and all of God's creatures. So part of our project together is thinking about how to educate the children about why they need to save the forest.
Okay. Now I'd just like to take a moment to reflect on the approach being used here. Dr. Lowman is doing more than collecting data and publishing papers in peer-reviewed journals. But she's actually prioritizing to conserve the forest first. Studying the biodiversity and the forest machinery, that can all be ongoing. The important thing right now is to get these walls up and stop the forest from shrinking. And the only way this has been possible is through local partnership. That's the only way this happens. The local collaboration and trust built up with the Coptic priests and Dr. Alamayu as one of the only local forest ecologists has allowed this project to succeed. This is called bottom-up conservation, when the locals work together and the culture is changed for the greater good. Instead of top-down conservation, where government officials make laws or requirements that are not always followed by the people. Building this trust is essential for working in different countries, and it requires patience, sensitivity to customs and culture. The partnership of science and religion is relatively unique, but there are many other cultures with sacred sites similar to Ethiopia, and so this model for church forests may lead to successful application elsewhere. How cool is that? Now let's get back and see bottom-up conservation in action. Back to you, Meg.
The book that is a gift for you, we are also giving to children and the schools around the church forests, explains why the forests are so important so that both children and adults can appreciate how valuable your church forest really is. One is, of course, that it's a home to pollinators and a source of honey. And another, of course, is that forest canopies are very important filters to make the water fresh. Also, the forests are a source for a lot of your medicines and also for the local dyes used in many different church murals and other activities. Most of your trees don't grow anywhere else in the world. And so many medicines have come from plants in different countries, but you have your own unique apothecary. In your forests, of course, coffee in the understory is a very sustainable industry, and firewood, if harvested carefully, can be done forever. In the scientific world, we understand that forests provide us with oxygen, fresh air. They keep us alive. They do things for the atmosphere that's very important for all of us to live on Earth. Trees are the only machine that can take sunlight and make food for us. There is so much that is living in the church forest that can't live without the trees and without the shade and without the forest. All kinds of creatures that don't live out in the middle of the millet crop or out in the middle of the corn. And trees and church forests, of course, make the soil better, the leaves fall, and the roots keep the water in that area, so it's a very important ecosystem. And of course, the church forest does all of these wonderful things while we sleep. And maybe most important for all of you is the church forest is a very important spiritual center. My voice as a global scientist, a person coming in with the very big privilege of sharing your forests, is to try to help in any way with Dr. Alamayu and with the religious leaders. How can we make sure that we can be a positive contribution? So I am your voice from the outside. Some of my contributions have been fundraising on the web, using the internet to tell the story to children, creating the book the best I could do. Maybe it's not perfect, and I hope the Amharic is okay. Also, creating the story for the global community, because the world really loves your forests, not just the people that live here. So trying to use a little technology like sharing the Google Earth images with all of you hopefully can help you working with yourselves and your communities to save your forests. I don't know how translatable this is, but that little beetle, I auctioned the name, it's a new beetle, to raise enough money to make the wall at Zara. Another project that we hope to use and having information about all of God's creatures on t-shirts. We're always looking for ways and ideas that you might have to help us educate the children about the importance of the church forest. We're also happy to give you a copy of the book, several copies. We also welcome your future thoughts and ideas about how we can work together, local and global, to make sure that your forests are always safe. So summary, the church forest is a treasure for the church, for all of you, for the people who live around you, for all of Ethiopia, and for all of your children and grandchildren, but also for the whole world. So that is why we have a partnership to work together to make sure these forests are always a part of the planet. Our Tree Foundation is a little group where we fundraise to help to make sure the walls get built. There we are. Thank you.
When Dr. Alamayu spoke, he continued to emphasize the value and importance of the church forest to the future of a healthy people in northern Ethiopia. Just in case you don't speak Amharic, I'll sum up for you what he said. He has chosen the 28 most diverse church forests, the ones with the largest genetic library of species, some of which are only found here. Now, at the current rate, these forests would all be gone in just a handful of years. So the priest decided to surround each church forest with its own dry wall. He updated the priests on the progress being made on constructing walls on the 28 most biodiverse church forests, which churches had completed walls, those under construction, and those that had yet to build. Later, he opened up the discussion to the room, and the results were fascinating. The priests voiced their concerns and shared memories of what the forest used to be like, stories of local conservation and local destruction. They shared that they had learned many new things that day, the importance of the forest, especially for drinking water. Many were heartened by the American case study, since the U.S. had cut 95% of its trees about 100 years ago and has since recovered 40%. They were impressed with New York's decision to buy a forest, to buy the Catskill Mountains with the money they had set aside for clean drinking water, so that the forest could naturally give them pure, clean drinking water. Then Dr. A gave a call to action. He said if you agree to preserve the church forests, he was ready. Dr. Lowman was ready. Are you ready to do it? Are you priests, don't you consider this your heritage? Like the spiritual documents and murals, some of which are also being preserved. It was clear that they felt passionate. There was a consensus that they would be the ones to preserve their heritage, to make sure that their forests were there for generations to come. It's going to be a long road ahead with lots of work. But the priests are not daunted. They want to continue to build relationships, pass information on to generations to protect the spiritual and natural heritage of northern Ethiopia.